The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Sarah Martinez stared at the stack of paperwork that seemed to multiply every time she looked away. Her crisp military uniform felt foreign against the fabric of the office chair, and the computer screen glowed with endless spreadsheets and reports that needed filing. This wasn't what she had signed up for when she joined the military 5 years ago. At 28, Sarah had already served 3 tours overseas, leading reconnaissance missions that required split-second decisions and nerves of steel. She had crawled through enemy territory under cover of darkness, coordinated evacuations under fire, and saved more lives than she could count. Her chest bore ribbons that told stories of courage most people could never imagine. Yet here she sat, reduced to processing forms and answering phones in the administrative office of Fort Harrison. The reassignment had come suddenly, wrapped in bureaucratic language that made little sense. Administrative repositioning due to operational requirements, the orders had read. Sarah knew better. She understood the real reason behind her new desk job, even if no one would say it out loud. 3 months earlier, during her last mission in Afghanistan, Sarah had witnessed something that made her stomach turn. Major Richards, her commanding officer, had been taking supplies meant for local villages and selling them on the black market. Medicine, food, and equipment that could save lives were being traded for personal profit. When Sarah tried to report it through proper channels, she found herself facing a wall of silence and subtle threats. "Martinez, you need to think carefully about what you're saying," Major Richards had warned her during a private meeting. "Accusations like these can destroy careers, yours included." But Sarah couldn't stay silent. She had joined the military to protect people, not to watch them suffer while others profited from their pain. She filed her report anyway, providing detailed evidence of the corruption she had witnessed. Within weeks, she found herself pulled from active duty and shipped back to a desk job stateside. The morning sun streamed through the office windows as Sarah organized files that felt meaningless compared to the real work she used to do. Around her, other administrative staff chatted about weekend plans and office gossip. None of them knew about her background or the reasons she was there. To them, she was just another paper pusher who had probably never seen real action. "Martinez, I need these requisition forms filed by noon," called Sergeant Thompson from across the room. He was a career administrator who seemed to take pleasure in assigning the most mundane tasks possible. His belly hung over his belt, and his soft hands had never held anything more dangerous than a stapler. Ezra nodded and took the stack of forms, each one representing equipment requests from various units across the base. As she worked through them, she noticed something odd. Several requests were for the same items, submitted by different departments on the same day. The quantities seemed excessive, and the timing was suspicious. Her instincts, honed by years of real military service, began to tingle. She had seen patterns like this before, during her investigation into Major Richards' activities. Someone was gaming the system, ordering more supplies than needed, and likely diverting the excess for profit. Sarah's fingers moved quickly across her keyboard as she pulled up the electronic record system. Years of intelligence training had taught her how to navigate databases and spot inconsistencies that others might miss. The more she dug, the more obvious the pattern became. Captain Williams in the motor pool was requesting twice as many vehicle parts as his unit actually needed. Lieutenant Davis from Communications was ordering expensive electronic equipment that didn't match his department's authorized inventory. The requests all went through different approval channels, making it hard to spot the duplication unless someone was specifically looking for it. But Sarah was looking, and what she found made her blood boil. The corruption she had tried to expose overseas had followed her home. The same kind of greed that had stolen food from hungry villages was now stealing resources from American military units. The problem was that she was stuck behind a desk with no authority to investigate properly. Her current position gave her access to records but not the power to act on what she found. Any attempt to report her suspicions would likely result in the same treatment she had received before: silence, threats, and possibly another reassignment to an even worse position. As the days passed, Sarah continued to gather information while maintaining the facade of a dutiful administrator. She memorized names, dates, and patterns, building a mental file of evidence that grew stronger each day. The corruption network was larger than she had initially suspected, involving multiple departments and reaching higher up the chain of command than she had imagined. During lunch breaks, Sarah would walk around the base, observing the operations with trained eyes. She watched as supply trucks made deliveries and noted which ones seemed to have discrepancies between their manifests and their actual cargo. She observed personnel who seemed to have access to areas beyond their clearance levels and equipment that didn't match their assigned duties. One afternoon, while filing reports in the basement storage area, Sarah overheard a conversation that confirmed her worst suspicions. Two officers were discussing a shipment that was supposed to be lost in transit, while actually being redirected to a private warehouse off base. They spoke in code, but Sarah's experience with intelligence gathering made their meaning clear. The weight of knowledge sat heavy on her shoulders as she returned to her desk. She had uncovered a conspiracy that was stealing millions of dollars worth of military resources, but she was powerless to stop it from her current position. Every day that passed meant more theft, more betrayal of the oath these officers had sworn to uphold. Sarah's frustration grew as she watched the daily routine of the administrative office continue around her. Sergeant Thompson assigned her increasingly trivial tasks, as if trying to break her spirit through sheer boredom. Other staff members treated her with the casual indifference reserved for someone they assumed had no real military experience. "Must be nice to have such an easy job," commented Private Jenkins one morning as he delivered mail to Sarah's desk. "Sitting in air conditioning all day, no real responsibilities." Sarah bit back her response, knowing that revealing her background would only create more problems. She had learned to keep her medals and commendations locked away, presenting herself as just another administrative worker who had never seen combat. The deception was necessary for her survival in this environment, but it ate at her pride every day. Meanwhile, the evidence of corruption continued to mount. Sarah discovered that the network extended beyond simple supply theft. Falsified reports were being filed to cover missing equipment, and inspection schedules were being manipulated to hide the evidence. Personnel records showed officers receiving promotions despite performance reports that should have prevented advancement, suggesting that the corruption included influence peddling and favor trading. The sophistication of the operation impressed and horrified Sarah in equal measure. This wasn't the work of a few opportunistic individuals stealing supplies for quick profit. It was a systematic enterprise that had corrupted multiple levels of the military hierarchy, turning the institution she had dedicated her life to serving into a vehicle for personal enrichment. As weeks turned into months, Sarah's isolation deepened. She couldn't trust anyone in her immediate environment, knowing that any one of them might be part of the network she was investigating. The loneliness was almost as difficult to bear as the frustration of being unable to act on what she had discovered. Her only contact with her former military life came through occasional messages from soldiers she had served with overseas. They wrote about their current missions, their challenges, and their successes. Reading their accounts of meaningful military service while she processed meaningless paperwork felt like torture. But Sarah refused to give up. She had sworn an oath to defend her country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The criminals stealing from the military were as much a threat to national security as any foreign adversary, and she would find a way to stop them, regardless of her current circumstances. Every morning she walked into that fluorescent-lit office with renewed determination. Every day she gathered more evidence and refined her understanding of the corruption network. She might be stuck behind a desk, but her mind remained sharp and her purpose clear. The breakthrough would come eventually, Sarah told herself. Someone with the authority and integrity to act on her findings would notice what was happening. Until then, she would continue to do her duty, even if that duty meant playing the role of a powerless administrator while secretly building a case that could bring down some of the most corrupt elements in the military. The irony wasn't lost on her that her greatest challenge wasn't coming from enemy forces in a foreign land, but from the criminal elements within her own ranks. The war she was fighting now was being conducted with spreadsheets and filing systems instead of weapons and tactics, but it was no less important than any battle she had fought overseas. As another day ended and Sarah locked away her desk, she reflected on the strange turn her career had taken. She had gone from leading soldiers in combat to counting supplies in storage rooms. But she was still a soldier, still serving her country, and still fighting for what was right. The battlefield had changed, but her mission remained the same: to protect and defend against those who would do harm to the institution and people she had sworn to serve. The fluorescent lights dimmed as the office emptied for the day, But Sarah's resolve burned brighter than ever. Tomorrow would bring another day of mundane tasks and bureaucratic tedium, but it would also bring new opportunities to gather evidence and move closer to exposing the truth. She had been sent to a desk job to be silenced and forgotten, but she refused to accept either fate. In the quiet of the empty office, surrounded by filing cabinets and computer terminals, Sara Martinez continued her most important mission yet, one that would ultimately determine whether justice would prevail over corruption in the ranks of those sworn to protect their nation. 6 months into her desk assignment, Sara Martinez had become a master of invisible investigation. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, processing routine administrative tasks while her mind worked on the complex web of corruption she had uncovered. The dual existence had become second nature, appearing as a compliant office worker while secretly building the most comprehensive case of military fraud she had ever encountered. The morning routine never varied. Sara arrived at precisely 7:30, 15 minutes before the official start time, allowing her to review overnight reports and system updates before the office came alive with activity. The early moments of quiet gave her the opportunity to follow digital trails that might be obscured once the day's chaos began. Today brought an unexpected development. As Sara sorted through the overnight electronic communications, she noticed an urgent message from the base quartermaster requesting an immediate audit of medical supplies. The request seemed routine on the surface, but something about the timing and specific items mentioned triggered her investigative instincts. Medical supplies had been a significant component of the corruption she had discovered overseas. Medications, surgical equipment, and emergency medical kits commanded high prices on the black market and were desperately needed in areas where proper medical care was scarce. If the same network was now targeting medical supplies stateside, the implications were even more serious than she had initially realized. Sara accessed the medical supply databases with her administrative credentials, carefully documenting her searches as routine data entry to avoid suspicion. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Shipments of expensive medications were being recorded as delivered to the base hospital, but the hospital's inventory records showed no corresponding increase in stock levels. The discrepancy was subtle but consistent. Pain medications, antibiotics, and surgical supplies were disappearing from official records without any documentation of their actual use or distribution. Someone was systematically stealing medical supplies that could mean the difference between life and death for wounded soldiers and their families who depended on base medical services. As Sara dug deeper into the medical supply chain, she discovered a pattern of falsified delivery confirmations and manipulated inventory reports. The theft was being coordinated between the supply depot, the transportation unit, and elements within the hospital administration itself. The scope of the conspiracy was larger than anything she had uncovered before. Her concentration was broken by the arrival of Sergeant Thompson, who shuffled over to her desk with his usual stack of assignments. His presence always made Sara tense, not because he was particularly threatening, but because his casual dismissal of her capabilities represented everything wrong with how her situation was being handled. "Martinez, I need you to reconcile these equipment transfer reports," Thompson said, dropping a thick folder onto her desk. "Some of the numbers aren't adding up, and the brass is asking questions." Sara accepted the folder with professional courtesy. But internally, alarm bells were ringing. Equipment transfer reports were exactly the type of documents that would reveal the corruption network's activities. If the higher command was asking questions about discrepancies, it could mean either that someone else was investigating or that the criminals were becoming careless enough to attract attention. The transfer reports told a story that confirmed Sara's growing understanding of the corruption's complexity. Equipment was being transferred between units using legitimate authorization codes, but the actual items were being diverted to unauthorized locations during transit. The paperwork showed proper chain of custody, but the physical reality was entirely different. One report particularly caught Sara's attention. A shipment of advanced communications equipment had been transferred from Fort Harrison to a training facility in Nevada, but the receiving unit had no record of the equipment's arrival. When Sara cross-referenced the transportation records, she found that the convoy had made an unauthorized stop at a civilian facility that had no legitimate connection to military operations. The facility's address led Sara into a new avenue of investigation. Using her administrative access to commercial databases, She discovered that the location was registered to a logistics company, owned by someone whose name appeared frequently in the military personnel records she had been studying. The connection was indirect but unmistakable. Military officers were using their positions to funnel stolen equipment to private companies they controlled or had financial interests in. As the day progressed, Sarah continued to process Thompson's assignments, while secretly expanding her investigation into the civilian side of the corruption network. The task required careful balancing of her official duties with her unauthorized research, a delicate dance that had become increasingly challenging as the scope of her investigation grew. During lunch break, Sarah walked to the base library, ostensibly to return some technical manuals, but actually to use the computers there for more sensitive searches. The library's internet access allowed her to research the corporate entities she had identified without leaving traces in the military's computer systems. What she found was staggering. The logistics company was part of a larger network of businesses, all connected through shared ownership or management structures. These companies held contracts with various military installations across the country, creating opportunities for large-scale theft and resale of government property. The business relationships revealed a sophisticated criminal enterprise that extended far beyond Fort Harrison. Sarah realized she had stumbled upon a national conspiracy that was stealing millions of dollars worth of military resources while weakening the readiness and capabilities of units across the armed forces. Back at her desk, Sarah's mind raced with the implications of what she had discovered. The corruption network wasn't just stealing supplies for profit. It was potentially compromising national security by depriving military units of essential equipment and resources. The medical supply theft could result in preventable deaths, while the communications equipment theft could interfere with military operations in dangerous situations. The weight of knowledge pressed heavily on Sarah's shoulders as she continued her mundane administrative tasks. She possessed information that could expose a massive criminal conspiracy, but she remained powerless to act on it from her current position. Every day that passed meant more theft, more potential harm to military readiness, and more betrayal of the public trust. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to the administrative office. Colonel James Morrison, the base inspector general, made an unannounced visit that sent ripples of nervous energy through the staff. His reputation for thorough investigations and intolerance for misconduct was well known throughout the military community. Colonel Morrison moved through the office with purposeful strides, reviewing operations and asking probing questions about procedures and oversight measures. His presence made several staff members visibly uncomfortable, particularly those who Sarah suspected might have connections to the corruption network. When the colonel reached Sarah's desk, he paused to examine the work she was doing. His keen eyes scanned the equipment transfer reports she was reconciling, and Sarah noticed a slight frown cross his face as he reviewed the discrepancies that had been flagged. "These numbers don't make sense," Colonel Morrison observed, pointing to one of the reports. "How does a unit receive equipment that was never shipped and ship equipment that was never received?" "Sir, I've been noticing some inconsistencies in the reporting systems. The documentation doesn't always match up with the physical inventories." "Have you reported these inconsistencies through proper channels?" the colonel asked, his tone suggesting genuine interest rather than routine inquiry. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah knew that this might be her only opportunity to bring her concerns to someone with the authority to act on them, but she also knew the risks involved. Her previous attempts to report corruption had resulted in her current desk assignment, and there was no guarantee that Colonel Morrison wasn't part of the network she had been investigating. "Sir, I've documented the discrepancies in my reports, but I haven't had the authority to pursue them beyond basic reconciliation," Sarah replied carefully, testing the waters without revealing the full extent of her knowledge. Colonel Morrison studied her for a long moment, his experienced eyes seeming to evaluate not just her words, but her character and motivations. Sarah had the distinct impression that this conversation was more significant than it appeared on the surface. "Soldier, what's your background before this assignment?" the colonel asked, a question that surprised Sarah with its directness. "Sir, I served 3 tours overseas in reconnaissance and intelligence operations before being reassigned to administrative duties," Sarah answered truthfully, wondering where this line of questioning might lead. The colonel's expression shifted slightly, suggesting recognition or understanding that hadn't been present before. "Intelligence background. That explains why you're noticing patterns that others might miss." Sarah remained silent, unsure how to respond to the observation. She had worked hard to keep her background and capabilities hidden during her time in the administrative office, but Colonel Morrison seemed to see through her carefully constructed facade.
"I'll be conducting a comprehensive review of base operations over the next few weeks," Colonel Morrison announced to the office in general, though his eyes remained focused on Sarah. "I expect full cooperation from all personnel, and I want to hear about any concerns or irregularities that might affect operational efficiency or integrity." The announcement sent a wave of tension through the office. Sarah noticed several staff members exchanging worried glances, while others seemed to find sudden interest in their computer screens. The reaction confirmed her suspicions about the extent of corruption within the administrative systems. As Colonel Morrison prepared to leave, he turned back to Sarah with what appeared to be an afterthought.
"Martinez, I want you to prepare a comprehensive report on the equipment transfer discrepancies you've identified. Include all supporting documentation and any recommendations you might have for improving the tracking systems." The request was phrased as a routine assignment, but Sarah understood its deeper significance. Colonel Morrison was giving her an opportunity to present her findings in an official capacity, with the protection that came from direct orders from a senior officer. After the colonel left, the office atmosphere remained tense throughout the rest of the day. Sarah could feel eyes on her as she worked, and she noticed several hushed conversations taking place in corners and behind closed doors. Her interaction with Colonel Morrison had clearly been observed and noted by people who might view it as a threat. Sergeant Thompson appeared at her desk near closing time, his usual casual demeanor replaced by obvious nervousness. "Martinez, what did the IG want to know about those transfer reports?" "Just routine questions about the reconciliation process, Sergeant," Sarah replied neutrally, not wanting to reveal the true nature of her conversation with the colonel. Thompson nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with her answer. "Well, make sure you follow proper procedures for any reports you prepare. We don't want any misunderstandings about operational matters." The warning was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah understood that her activities were being watched more closely now, and that her safety might depend on how carefully she navigated the next few days. The corruption network had survived this long by eliminating threats, and her conversation with Colonel Morrison had potentially marked her as a significant risk. As the office emptied for the day, Sarah remained at her desk, ostensibly finishing her assigned work, but actually planning her next moves. Colonel Morrison's request for a comprehensive report gave her the cover she needed to document everything she had discovered, but it also put her in greater danger from those who had the most to lose from exposure. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Sarah worked alone in the quiet office, typing her preliminary findings into what would become the most important report of her career. She had been sent to this desk job to be silenced and forgotten, but circumstances were finally aligning to give her a voice that might be heard by someone with the power to act. The next morning brought an air of anticipation that Sarah Martinez could feel the moment she walked into the administrative office. Colonel Morrison's visit had changed the dynamics of the workplace in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. Conversations stopped when she approached, and several staff members seemed to be watching her movements with unusual interest. Sarah settled into her routine, processing the morning reports while keeping her senses alert for any signs of the increased surveillance she suspected was taking place. Her years of intelligence training had taught her to recognize when she was being observed, and every instinct told her that her activities were now under close scrutiny. The comprehensive report Colonel Morrison had requested sat on her desk in a sealed envelope, ready for delivery. 3 days of careful work had gone into documenting the corruption network she had uncovered, with every allegation supported by multiple sources of evidence and cross-referenced documentation. The report was 47 pages of detailed analysis that laid out a conspiracy involving dozens of military personnel and millions of dollars in stolen resources. At precisely 1000 hours, Colonel Morrison's aide appeared at the administrative office to collect Sarah's report. The young lieutenant's presence drew immediate attention from the entire staff, confirming Sarah's suspicion that her assignment from the colonel was being closely monitored by people with serious concerns about what she might have discovered. "Sergeant Martinez, the colonel is ready to review your analysis," the aide announced formally, accepting the sealed envelope with military precision. Sarah watched the lieutenant leave with her report, knowing that she had just crossed a line from which there might be no return. The evidence she had compiled was comprehensive enough to trigger major investigations, and potentially destroy the careers of numerous military personnel. If Colonel Morrison acted on her findings, the corruption network would be exposed. If he didn't, her situation could become significantly more dangerous. The morning passed with unusual quiet in the administrative office. Sergeant Thompson seemed distracted and nervous, frequently checking his phone and glancing toward Sarah's desk with obvious concern. Other staff members went through the motions of their duties, but the normal chatter and casual interactions were noticeably absent. Around noon, Sarah's computer terminal chimed with an incoming message that made her blood run cold. The communication was from Major Richards, her former commanding officer from Afghanistan, the same officer whose corruption she had tried to expose before being reassigned to her current position. Martinez, I understand you've been asking questions about administrative procedures at Fort Harrison. I think it would be beneficial for us to discuss your observations in person. I'll be visiting the base tomorrow to review some operational matters. Please make yourself available for a private meeting. The message was professionally worded, but Sarah understood its true meaning. Major Richards had learned about her investigation, probably through his connections within the corruption network, and he was coming to Fort Harrison to deal with the threat she represented. The timing, just hours after she had submitted her report to Colonel Morrison, was not coincidental. Sarah's hands remained steady as she deleted the message, but her mind raced with the implications of Major Richards' unexpected contact. His presence at Fort Harrison would give him access to resources and personnel that could be used to neutralize her investigation permanently. She had perhaps 24 hours before facing a confrontation with someone who had already demonstrated his willingness to destroy careers and possibly lives to protect his criminal activities. The afternoon brought another unexpected development when Colonel Morrison himself appeared in the administrative office, moving with the purposeful stride of someone on an important mission. His presence immediately captured the attention of everyone present, but his focus was clearly on Sarah. Sergeant Martinez, I need to speak with you privately, the colonel announced, his tone carrying the weight of command authority. Sarah followed Colonel Morrison to a small conference room adjacent to the main office area, aware that every eye in the building was tracking their movement. Once inside the soundproof room, the colonel closed the door and activated a small electronic device that Sarah recognized as a counter-surveillance system designed to prevent eavesdropping. Sergeant, I've reviewed your report, Colonel Morrison began without preamble. The evidence you've compiled is extensive and extremely serious. Before we proceed, I need to understand exactly how you came to possess this level of detailed information while assigned to routine administrative duties. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that this moment would determine not only the fate of her investigation but possibly her entire future in the military. Sir, my background in intelligence operations trained me to recognize patterns and inconsistencies. When I noticed discrepancies in the administrative records, I felt obligated to investigate further. That doesn't fully explain the depth of your analysis, Colonel Morrison replied, his penetrating gaze suggesting he suspected there was more to the story. You've identified corruption networks, traced financial relationships, and documented criminal activities with a level of sophistication that goes well beyond what routine administrative access would allow. The moment of truth had arrived. Sarah could continue to maintain the fiction that her investigation was limited and accidental, or she could trust Colonel Morrison with the full scope of what she had discovered and risk exposure of the unauthorized methods she had used to gather evidence. Sir, I believe I've uncovered a conspiracy that threatens the integrity of military operations on a national scale, Sarah said, choosing her words carefully. The evidence suggests systematic theft of resources, falsification of official records, and coordination between military personnel and civilian criminal enterprises. Colonel Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. These are extremely serious allegations, Sergeant. If proven, they could result in court-martial proceedings for dozens of officers and enlisted personnel. They could also result in serious consequences for anyone who made unauthorized investigations or accessed classified information without proper authority. The warning was clear, but Sarah detected something in the colonel's tone that suggested he might be testing her commitment rather than threatening her. Her years of reading people under pressure told her that Colonel Morrison was evaluating her character and motivations, not preparing to end her investigation. Sir, I understand the risks involved, Sarah replied steadily. but I believe the threat to military readiness and the safety of our personnel outweighs those considerations." For a long moment, Colonel Morrison studied her in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a different quality, less formal, more personal. "Sergeant Martinez, what I'm about to tell you must remain strictly confidential until this investigation is complete. Your report has confirmed suspicions that have been developing at the highest levels of military command for several months." Sarah's pulse quickened as she realized the implications of the colonel's statement. Her investigation hadn't been the only one taking place. Her findings were apparently part of a larger pattern that had already attracted attention from senior military leadership. "We've been aware that significant resources were being diverted from their intended purposes," Colonel Morrison continued. "What we lacked was detailed documentation and evidence that could support legal action. Your analysis has provided exactly the kind of comprehensive case file we needed to move forward with formal investigations." The relief Sarah felt was tempered by a new understanding of the danger she faced. If her investigation was part of a larger effort to expose military corruption, then the criminal network would view her as an immediate and serious threat. The stakes were much higher than she had realized. "Sir, I should inform you that Major Richards, one of the officers I identified as part of the corruption network, has contacted me requesting a meeting," Sarah reported. "He's supposed to arrive at Fort Harrison tomorrow." Colonel Morrison's expression hardened immediately. "Major Richards is currently under investigation by the Criminal Investigation Division. His presence here is definitely not coincidental, and it represents a significant security risk for you personally." The confirmation that formal investigations were already underway changed everything for Sarah. She was no longer a lone administrator trying to expose corruption from a position of powerlessness. She was now a key witness in what appeared to be a major military law enforcement operation. "What I need from you now," Colonel Morrison continued, "is your complete cooperation with the official investigation. That means no more unauthorized research, no independent actions, and absolute secrecy about what we've discussed here today." Sarah nodded her understanding, but she also had questions about her immediate safety and future role. "Sir, what about Major Richards' request for a meeting? How should I respond?" "You won't be responding at all," Colonel Morrison replied firmly. "As of this moment, you're being placed in protective custody, pending the completion of the investigation. Your cover as a routine administrator has been compromised, and your safety can no longer be guaranteed in your current assignment." The speed with which events were moving left Sarah's head spinning. In the space of a few hours, she had gone from being a forgotten desk worker to a protected witness in a major criminal investigation. The transformation was everything she had hoped for when she first began documenting the corruption, but it also marked the end of the careful anonymity that had protected her for so many months. "There's something else you need to know," Colonel Morrison added, his tone becoming more serious. "Your original reassignment to administrative duties wasn't random or punitive. You were placed here specifically because we suspected this location was a hub for the corruption network we were investigating. Your intelligence background made you the ideal person to gather evidence from the inside." Sarah stared at the colonel in shock as the implications of his revelation sank in. Her desk assignment hadn't been a punishment for reporting Major Richards' corruption overseas. It had been a carefully planned undercover operation designed to place a trained investigator in the heart of the criminal network. "Sir, are you saying that my entire situation here was orchestrated?" Sarah asked, struggling to process the new information. "Your reassignment was arranged by the highest levels of military intelligence," Colonel Morrison confirmed. "Your personnel file was deliberately modified to hide your true qualifications and service record. Everyone involved in the corruption network was led to believe you were just another routine administrator with no special training or capabilities." The revelation explained so many things that had puzzled Sarah during her months at Fort Harrison. The way her service record seemed to have been sanitized, the casual dismissal of her capabilities by people like Sergeant Thompson, the ease with which she had been able to access sensitive information systems. All of it had been carefully arranged to support her undercover role. "Your investigation exceeded all our expectations," Colonel Morrison continued. "The evidence you've gathered will be instrumental in prosecuting one of the largest military corruption cases in recent history. Dozens of people will face court-martial, and millions of dollars in stolen resources will be recovered." As the full scope of the operation became clear, Sarah felt a mixture of pride and exhaustion. She had spent months believing she was fighting a lone battle against insurmountable odds, when in reality she had been part of a carefully coordinated effort involving the highest levels of military command. Her isolation and apparent powerlessness had been necessary elements of her cover, but they had also taken a significant psychological toll. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, ready to face whatever came next. "Now we finish what you started," Colonel Morrison replied with a slight smile. "The arrests begin tomorrow, starting with Major Richards when he arrives for his unauthorized meeting. Your undercover assignment is complete, Sergeant Martinez, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that your service to this country will be officially recognized for the exceptional contribution it has been." As Sarah left the conference room and prepared for the final phase of the investigation, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. She had been sent to a desk job that seemed like punishment, but turned out to be the most important assignment of her career. The colonel had found out her true service record, but instead of ending her investigation, it had validated everything she had worked to accomplish. The fluorescent lights still hummed overhead in the administrative office, and the same mundane tasks continued around her. But everything had changed. Tomorrow would bring arrests, revelations, and the exposure of a conspiracy that had threatened the integrity of the military she had sworn to serve. Her mission was nearly complete, and justice would finally be served.